Anyway, I want to thank the Manitoba by Prep Alliance for the invitation to come here and speak. I'm really excited to share a little bit of what our long-term projects. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background about the Carrington Research Extension Center, where it's at, and then I'll give you background on our specific project that I want to share with you, and then we'll work on summarizing our results and then with our economics. And Ezra got some of his apologies. He was not feeling well, and he sent me a text at 7:30 this morning. This has been his baby for the last 20 years. I have most of the overview, but as there's some of the nitty-gritty details, I'll have his contact information posted on the last slide, so we can ask him a bunch of questions, hopefully. Okay. So, if you're not familiar with Carrington, it's in the center of North Dakota. Just to give you an idea of what our average temperatures are in an area, remember, Celsius in there to make this easy conversion. So we have, usually our temperature average is about 59 degrees or 15 degrees. We usually have about 6 times rainfall throughout the growing season, or 39 centimeters, what so be. The type of soil that we have is done down emerald homes, and it's pretty flat, kind of like when I was grabbing to the south. For the most part, we don't have a lot of grade in this area. So a little bit about our Research Extension Center. In the States, North Dakota is pretty unique because we have 8 different stations that are focused on research. We have one in Fargo, and that's considered a main station. That is way over on the right over here. And then we have multiple other stations that are scattered throughout the state. And they are started to address unique needs within that region. So one of our stations, even down here in the southwest corner, that one focuses a lot on sheep production. So each station is really unique in what they do. So in Carrington, we were started 60 years ago as the irrigation station, because irrigation was just starting in North Dakota. But we have since expanded greatly. So we have livestock production. We have a dry lot feedlot that has been in existence for the past, I believe it's 40 years now. So those cattle never really go up to range. They're considered dry lots. So we have that unique opportunity at that station. We also do foundation seed production. We have a plant pathology program, a soils program. We also had an organic production program, and then we have the agronomy programs. One thing that is very unique is, even though we are tied to our Niagara University at the main station in Fargo, we are not funded through the university. We are a line item, and we are funded by our state legislature. So there is your unbiased testing service, and we're not dependent upon students or student attendance. So we have a little more longevity, which is really good, because now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the long-term cropping systems project we have. So this is one of the longest cropping systems projects that I'm aware of. It was started in 1987. So the results that I'm going to be talking about are at the end of cycle 9 of our 4-year rotation. So this one particular project takes up roughly 50 acres. We started out with an organic matter of 3.1%. And the land was originally in a spring wheat, sunflower, barley, fallow rotation back in 1986. And so it's been set up so that we have 3 different rotations that are completed every 4 years. And if you take a look, this is a picture of our entire study. And what's really unique about our site is, like in rotation 1, crop 1, we don't have just crop 1. We have crops 1, 2, 3, and 4. So every crop in our rotation is represented every year. that helps us filter out some of the environmental effects, like a drought, excess water, ideally hail, anything else like that, so we work on balancing things. So to give you an idea what one of our little blocks looks like within there is it's a split block design for those of you who are into statistics. My understanding is Ezra had to consult with at least 4 different universities with statisticians in order to figure out how to be able to analyze this data to report any significant differences. So once he's got the code, it just runs on his computer for like a month so he can get everything done. So we have 3 different types of tillage. We have a no-till, a conventional till, and a minimum till. And my biggest question to him is, what do you consider minimum till? Everybody I talk to says something a little bit different. So what minimum till is in this particular cycle is it was disked before it was planted to corn or sunflowers. That was the only tillage that was done for minimum till. And that tillage was done in the fall. And then as far as conventional tillage, then that tillage was done in the spring and it was done on all the crops. So all the tillage was applied, spring applied. Now let's talk a little bit about our fertility treatments. We have 5 different fertility treatments. We have what would we consider our check where we don't apply any nitrogen. In this particular one, it's down on the bottom. Then we have our 50 pounds of nitrogen, usually applied with urea. We also have composted manure. Remember I mentioned we have a feedlot. We happen to have easy access to manure that's been composted, so it makes an interesting comparison. Then we also went on the higher side for nitrogen. We did 100 pounds and 150 pounds. Now, if you're looking at this one, you might wonder, why are the blocks not the same length? Well, each of the tillage treatments is 60 feet wide because this experiment was started in '87, so we are still using the exact same equipment that was used in '87, so our width is either 15 feet or 20 feet, so it's been consistent year after year. So our plots are 60 feet in width for our tillage equipment, and then if you go with the blocks, they originally started out as 100 feet, but then when we go to apply our nitrogen, our equipment was only 40 feet. I think that's what Ezra said with the Velmar. So then it allowed him to be able to send the treatments down and back or figure out how to plug it. So they are sized to work with the equipment that we started this experiment with way back in the 80s. Okay. So then I want to mention briefly about the 3 different rotations that were used. They were chosen because they were common to the area. So one of them was alternating dicot, monocot. So think about your monocots are your cereals or your corn. Your dicots are like all your legumes or your sunflowers. And I'll get into those specifically as we go. So if you're taking a look at the overall map, this is what it would look like graphically if you laid it over the top of the very first picture that you saw. And if you look at the specific rotations, those are listed up in the top left. So rotation 1 was the spring wheat, followed by sunflowers, barley, and soybeans. Rotation 2, spring wheat, field pea, corn, soybeans. And rotation 3 is winter wheat, corn, soybean, and spring wheat. We are no longer doing winter wheat after having failures more than a couple years in a row. So that one is now in cycle 10 has been replaced with spring wheat so that we keep the wheats at least the same. So if you also look, you'll see the colored. It's done in 3 replicates. So we have 3 replicates on our study. You'll see that if you look at the different shading, that we have every crop represented every year for every rotation. So we're going to talk about the results from one particular 4-year study. It would be cycle 9, and it ran from 2019 to 2022. So to give you an idea what the precipitation or what the weather was like, we had normal precipitation in 2019, and then we had drought
that hit us in 2020. But we still had a little bit of subsoil moisture, and we still had some timely rains. So you didn't see as much of an effect from the drought, but we had drought again the next year. So there was no subsoil moisture, and you'll see that all the yields fell down considerably during 2021. And then in 2022, we went back to normal precipitation. So now that you have a little bit of background, I'm going to go into some of the results. I'm going to focus a little bit on some of the differences in soil that we see after having this study going on for 36 years. And then I'll go into the results by crop, and I'll mention differences that we observe with tillage, fertility, and rotation on yield. And then we'll move into a little bit on the economic analysis. And you guys will be the first ones to see the economic analysis because he just finished that the end of last week for this cycle. So I'm kind of excited with some of what we saw. Okay, so starting out with a little bit on the soil and looking at tillages. So with most of these slides, you're going to see that they're broken up. The yellow is looking at nitrogen. And when you look at it, yes, there are trends, but there's no statistical differences. So even though the tillage column had higher fertility, it's not significantly different. So it could happen, it could not happen, just depends on the year. And if you look at pH, they're all pretty much the same. And then if you look at the far graph, that's our organic matter. And that's where we actually see that doing no-till gives us a higher percent of organic matter. Our organic matter was at just at 3.9%, but it was statistically more than the 3.8. So it was only at 0.1%, but it's still significantly different. So now I'm going to look at fertility, and we're going to specifically look at the differences that we saw across these different levels of fertility. So if you're looking at nitrogen, you get kind of what you expected. If you had applied 0 nitrogen, it stayed really low. If you applied more nitrogen, you'll see that it trends up. And if you look at the M, that's our composted manure. Our composted manure is applied at roughly 200 pounds every 4th year. So it would kind of average out to the 50, and that's pretty much where we're seeing it is matching that 50-pound amount of urea that was applied. Okay. So when we look at this one is that and then we go to pH. What we expect to see is that there is significantly higher pH in the soils that had composted manure applied. But the other ones, there's no significant differences. They can trend a little bit different, but if you apply the statistics, you don't see a difference. And if you look at the organic matter, what you're going to see is that you see with a composted manure, kind of like what you would expect, significant difference. You're going to have more organic matter in those soils where you're adding that composted manure, you're adding more microorganisms, you're just adding more material. So if you, like in the organic matter, the difference is, sorry, that's a long ways away. He had specifics in there and I can't read them. Something about older eyes. Okay, so if you go ahead and you're looking at combining those two factors, so you're looking at fertility and you're combining it then with the tillage, what you can see is that there are some definite trends. The problem is there's still no statistical differerences, but you can see if you have less nitrogen, you would expect to stay at low nitrogen. And as you keep moving on, you see higher nitrogen. The important part is that you're going to see that you have nitrogen tends to run a little bit higher in the tilled systems versus the no-till systems, likely because it's being incorporated in instead of sitting on the surface hoping and praying that rain comes timely. Okay, then we're going to look at pH across the years. You typically look at it, you're going to see that the pH runs a little bit higher in the manure studies way down at the end. And you're going to see that the pH is definitely lower when you're looking at those more moderate rates of urea application. So then taking a quick look at organic matter across all the years, when you're looking and dividing out the tillage and the urea, you're going to see that the most important point is that the no-till plus the composted manure plots had the highest organic matter. They're at 4.3%. The bad thing is still no statistical differences, but it still trends higher, and even a little bit is important. Okay, here's our quick summary for the soil. So as nitrate increases, as the rates went up, that's what you would expect. They're higher in the tilled systems than in the no-till system. There was no significant differences on pH. However, nitrogen application definitely affects pH. Tillage has a significant effect on on organic matter, and that those no-till plots with manure usually have the highest organic matter. So you want to keep in mind that every 1% increase in soil organic matter enables the soil to store an additional 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters of moisture throughout the year. Really important if you're going into a drought. That also, that 1% increase in soil organic matter allows you to capture another 20 to 40 pounds of nitrogen. Therefore, you don't have to apply as much. That much more is available for your crop that next year. Okay, now I'm going to start moving into the crop results. So if you remember right from earlier in the presentation, I mentioned that 2020, we had our first year drought. There was still subsoil moisture. 2021, we had the drought. So you can see that there's a definite difference in yield, and this is in corn. So then we want to take a look at how they average out across our different tillage methods. You'll see that there's really no significant differences. We're able to do these because remember we have corn growing in every year, so we can average it across and still make valid comparisons. So we're still comparing apples to apples, not apples to oranges. So now if you look at differences in fertility, you're going to see that the yield is significantly higher. Of course, it's in our manure plot, but even the other ones are considerably higher than those plots where we didn't apply any nitrogen at all. Now we're going to skip to our next crop, and that's barley. You can see that we've got yield on the left side, and again, it reflects what the weather did. You'll notice that our barley had less than an average of 10 bushels per acre in our year of drought, and our better years were hitting right around 60. If you look at the average across tillage treatments, tillage treatment had no effect on our barley yields. And fertility, you'll notice the only one that is significantly different is the one where you added no nitrogen at all. So even adding a small amount of nitrogen helps boost your yields, and you get comparable yields if you were using 50, 150 composted manure. It didn't seem to matter, not with barley at least. Okay, now field pea, we're going to move on to that crop. This one was interesting. What did I tell you about 2020? We had a partial drought, but yet we had really high yields of peas. I don't know if any of you are aware of it, but peas with a lot of moisture don't agree because there's a lot of disease. And in our particular area, we spend a lot of time screening peas for disease. We have a lot of different nurseries because we get lots of pea diseases in Carrington, North Dakota on a regular precipitation year. So then if you take a look at the effect on pea yield with different tillage methods, you're going to see that there is no difference. Doesn't matter if you no-till, minimum till, or conventional till. If you're looking at fertility differences, you're going to see that 0 and 50 pounds were statistically similar. The higher rates of fertility were also statistically similar, and they were higher. So if you're looking at field peas, a little bit of nitrogen can help a little bit too. Although most people don't put nitrogen on field peas, they look at it, hey, they're going to fix my nitrogen for me. But if you're looking for yield and return, this is something you should think about and figure out where the balance is. Okay. Now we're going to move into spring wheat, and this is one where we usually want to take a look at what our protein is and how it's affected during the season and across the different methods. So if you take a look, we're going to see that what we'd expect based on moisture conditions with the changes in yield. If you look at protein in 21, it was a dry year, but we still had both dry years in 2020 and 2021. We had really high protein content, even though our yields were down. That's expected because when you have stressed wheat, we tend to get higher protein. Still not statistically significant, though. Too much variation across years. So if you take a look at spring wheat and you're looking at tillages, no difference on yield. Didn't matter what kind of tillage method we used. Protein, you're not seeing any statistical differences on protein differences either when you're looking at tillage. What about fertility? Well, here we go, we got manure again. That one comes up, it's statistically significant, you get higher yields. But if you take a look at the protein didn't do as well. So if you're looking at the possibility of discounts for low protein, this is something else to think about, that manure will definitely increase your yield on wheat, but it doesn't necessarily increase your protein content. If you look at it, the 100 and 150 pounds of nitrogen had by far the best protein content out there during this particular study, at least. Now, this is the only crop that we looked at where rotation was significantly affected the yield. So at the beginning, I mentioned that I had 3 different rotations. And here, if you look at the first one for yield, the difference isn't much, but it is significant. And it's spring wheat is followed by soybeans. And in rotation 3, it was significantly higher. It was only higher by a bushel and a half, but it was still a bushel and a half higher, and it was significant. And it's possible this is likely due to more residue and carbon in that particular rotation. And I'll mention this again at the end when I summarize the rotation results, so you can kind of look at the comparison. And if we take a look at protein, what we found is there is no difference for rotation on protein. The only difference we saw was on the yield of spring wheat in the one rotation. Okay. Now we're going to move into winter wheat. Even though we had a drought in 2020, we still had really great yields for winter wheat, and I think that's because we still had the timely rains, and we're able to harvest winter wheat before we would most of our other crops, so we were able to make use of any of that moisture that came from the winter. If we take a look at protein, we're going to see that there was big differences in protein depending on the year. Okay. Same story. Tillage has no effect on yield, and it had no effect on protein either. Fertility, of course, affected both of them. So you're looking at fertility, if you've got 100 pounds or the composted manure, you had higher yield. And then if you're looking at the protein, if you had 0 pounds of nitrogen added or that manure, it definitely dropped your protein down again. So thinking about what are you going to add so you have the highest yield and yet the higher protein so you're not discounted or you can get that premium. Okay, we've got sunflowers in one rotation. And what we found is that there was a significant difference on tillage in sunflowers. It's the only one that we have that's significantly different. And here, sunflowers did better in a no-till condition versus in the minimum till or the conventional till. They also did a lot better if they had composted manure. They were significantly higher. You'll see that the 100 pounds and 50 pounds is pretty close. You'll notice across all of the crops that 150 pounds really didn't make an increase on yield for no significant increase on the yield for any of the crops. I got soybeans next. I think we're almost done, at least with the crop side. So soybeans really didn't like the continued drought in 2021. You'll see that the yield dropped below 10 bushels an acre, really, really low for our area, considering that on a good year, we're pushing 45 to 60 really easy. And then if you take a look at differences in like protein and oil, there's no significant differences on soybean protein or oil across the years. Same case, no difference on tillage for soybeans on either yield or oil or protein. This is one of the more complicated graphs. It's the only one I had to put letters on to look at the significant differences. So across the different amounts of nitrogen or the fertility, we see that there are significant differences. And it looks like they got shifted when I moved the slides over here. But anyway, you'll notice that the tallest bar is significantly different than the next ones, and the next two are related. Those that are labeled C are very similar. So what we're seeing is that if you have composted manure or 100 pounds of nitrogen, you're seeing a consistently higher yield that's significantly different. If you're looking at protein and oil, there is no difference if you're looking at differences in fertility. If you look at rotation, once again, we don't have any significant differences on yield, oil, or protein for soybeans for the differences in our rotations. So tillage, summary, there's really no differences in tillage based on any of the crops, except for sunflowers where they did better in the no-till. So our fertility summary, composted manure significantly increases the yield for a lot of crops. You're going to see field pea increased at 3.8 bushels, soybean over 2. You're going to see corn had over 10 bushels an acre increase. Hard red spring wheat had over 4 bushels increase. Composted manure significantly lowered the protein in both our spring wheat and our winter wheat rotations. So remember, I said there was one crop where rotation had an effect, and that was on our spring wheat yield. And it only changed it at roughly 1.5 to 2 bushels. But if you look at the rotation, I have it listed where hard red spring wheat is the 4th crop. And if you look back, soybean is the same. There were no significant differences between rotation 1 and 2, so they were the same. And the only significant difference was rotation 3. So you're going back 4 years to be able to see what effect that has on a crop for the 4th growing season down. Okay? Just a good reminder that rotation is really important, and 4 years later you can still have a major effect. Okay. Now I'm guessing we're getting to the part that everybody's like, well, let's see the economics part now. So this was one I sent Ezra down to work on this, I think 2 months ago. I'm like, we need numbers. Everybody wants to know numbers. So he went down. We're fortunate enough that we have a farm business management specialist that's located in our building. So he went through and figured out everything for all the different treatments. So he's got all the production costs in there, including any of the fertilizer, tillage, seeding, chemical seed, combining, overhead, and a certain amount in there for land rent. So it's comparable across all of our treatments. Just as a basis, urea, he put at 31 cents. Now, keep in mind, this is in US dollars because I didn't have a chance to convert anything. And the manure came in at like 10 cents per pound of nitrogen. Now, before I go to the next slide, I gotta have a caveat to add in here. So for our wheat variety, because we get so heavily discounted if we have low protein, the wheat variety that was chosen for cycle 9 was one that consistently had high protein and not necessarily high yields. And I'll go through an example of why that's so important in just a minute. So we're looking at rotation 1. That's where we had spring wheat, sunflower, barley, and soybean. And you'll see that there is a lot of negative numbers in that spring wheat column. So spring wheat wasn't very profitable in this particular rotation. And if you go through and you follow it all the way over, if you take a look at the manure, you're going to find that if you look at the manure on the fertility is going to be the highest level of profit, no matter which way you're looking at, because it's an inexpensive source of urea. And if you're wondering what we used for an income price, we put the market prices down at the bottom that were used, and those are typically the prices that were found going off the combine. So it wasn't storage, it wasn't waiting for the best price, they were going off the combine. Okay. Now this is where it gets really important when I said that, hey, you see a lot of negative numbers for wheat. So I want to draw your attention, and we'll walk through one example on just one box so you can see what I was referring to. So in this particular cycle, the variety Glen was used. So it has typically a very low yield, but it's usually a little higher in protein. So the yield here was only 47.3 bushels. So that's what they were using to figure out all of the economics. And that's where they got that adjusted net of minus 82.92. Now if we were to switch to foliar, which is what's in cycle 10 of our study, you'll see that we have a 12 bushel increase. And then if you look at our adjusted net, then we're only down to a minus 8. And I just pulled out 2 other varieties. I saw AAC Brandon in my variety trial booklet for that year. And I'm like, oh wow, we had a really high yield there. But we still had minus 24. And I'm like, well, that's a little better than minus 82. And then I picked out Shelley, it's a Minnesota variety. And it did really well looking at that one. It yielded 65 bushels, and there we made a profit of $26, or we would have just in that rotation. So variety choice and the discounts that would go with protein make a big difference when looking at this. So when you look at my rotation studies and you see negative for all the wheat, there's a reason. We picked a lower variety, high protein, so we wouldn't get the discounts on it. I also want to mention that all of these charts, there's no farm payments in the U.S. that were added to this. This is just a rough cost so that you guys could see the raw numbers and make those comparisons. So here we're looking at this particular rotation, and again, you can see that the particular combinations that have composted manure usually are the most profitable. And then here is rotation 3. This is the one that has winter wheat in it, so it looks even worse. There is a reason why we are no longer doing winter wheat, because we cannot find a variety that does not winter kill frequently in Carrington. If you only have winter wheat that survives every other year or every third year, it doesn't make sense to keep it in the rotation for us. So that one has been pulled out. So here I put the rotations side by side so you can take a look at them. You'll notice it appears like rotations 1 and 2 are usually doing much better. And this was a typo that was on the slide transfer again. Yeah. So with that, and you've seen a lot of the economics, if you have questions on some of the nitty-gritty little details, feel free to ask them. And if I can't answer it, I'm going to have you contact Ezra, because as I mentioned, he's been the research specialist that has worked on this project for over 20 different years. And it's been his baby He does all of the planting, all of the maintenance, all of the notes, and all of the soil sampling on this particular study. And this is just one of roughly 200 different studies that we have at Carrington. We grow over 25 different crops annually at our research station, so it keeps us really busy jumping from crop to crop to crop for going from April 1st all the way through the end of November. And with that, are there any questions? Okay, as far as fertilizing, okay, the question did the soybeans and field peas, were they fertilized or did we rely on residual fertilizer? Fertilizer was applied every year. Didn't matter what the crop was, if it was in that treatment, it was applied. The only difference was the composted manure that was only applied every 4th year. I just don't remember which part of the rotation it was applied on. I know we applied some last year, but I can't tell you which plots.
Questions?
Okay. If not, I thank you very much for staying here and listening. I'll be around for a little bit if you have any other questions. Thank you.